All right, guys and gals, if you're still walking around the shop with USB sticks like it's 2007, or worse, if you're dusting off a floppy disk like you're starring in a retro horror film, it's time for a serious upgrade. Let me introduce you to G-Code Cloud plus DNC from Datanomix, because in this game, mistakes cost money, time, and maybe even your next DoD contract. This is GovCloud native, fully secure, built for compliance with the CMMC 2.0, AS9100, and all the other acronyms that make quality managers sleep at night. Full traceability, no drama. So instead of worrying about which G-code version got loaded or accidentally sending out the wrong one, you can focus on what really matters: making chips, meeting deadlines, and winning big contracts. Want to learn more? Check it out at Datanomix.io, because it's time we stop babysitting USB sticks and start growing real businesses.
Welcome to Manufacturing Mavericks, a podcast where we showcase and celebrate exceptional people from across precision manufacturing who are boldly embracing new ways to improve their processes, grow their bottom lines, and ensure American manufacturing will thrive for generations to come. Welcome to this episode of Manufacturing Mavericks. I'm your host, Greg McHale, and I am very pleased to be joined by our guest today, Dan Plath with Med Fab out of Minnesota. How are you today, Dan?
I'm doing well, Greg.
Awesome. It's great to connect with you, Dan. It's been great getting to know you over the last, what has it been, about a year or so? We've been getting to know each other. So I definitely appreciate having you as a customer and the way that you've certainly pushed us as a partner and as a vendor to help you realize the technical vision and the operational vision that you guys have at MedFab. So really appreciate having you on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, Dan, I know that, as we've gotten to know each other, as I was just saying, you certainly are someone that definitely thinks ahead in manufacturing and is pushing for what I would say are some pretty futuristic things for how you want the shop floor to be run and the kind of data you're looking for and the visibility you're looking for and the tools you're looking for. So before we get to that, why don't we start with what made you that way and how did you get into manufacturing in the first place? So how did you catch the bug?
I would classify myself coming out of high school as a pretty typical teenager in the sense that I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had an older brother that went into machining. He had gone through a machine trades program. I really had no idea what that even meant. But without a clear direction of where I was going, I thought, well, I'm just going to try that too. First year was very boring, I would say, to say the least. A lot of the manual equipment, the typical squaring of 1, 2, 3 blocks and grinding. And, I liked the theory. I started to really understand it and start to enjoy it by the end of that first year. But year 2, when we really got into CNC, mold making, die making, seeing functionality of a piece of metal turning into a usable product, I'd say that year was pivotal. That kind of changed my thought processes on everything. And I just really enjoyed it, that to the point where I was just kind of ripping through everything. I always wanted more, learn more, do more. Got to the point where those semesters I'd be done in half the time and teachers would have to send me home. That was a good indication that was probably something I was going to want to stick with for a career. So I'd say that's really where the torch started. I was fortunate enough to join a large organization, Toro. Definitely, if you know anything, a Minnesota manufacturing, Toro, big brand, lawn equipment. Got to get into that organization, really hone in machining skills. And a great perk, and I think this was key to younger generations understanding career path that I took and opportunities that are there. Doing the machining route and being in that organization and utilizing a tuition reimbursement program that they had allowed me to go back It was a engineering technology program, which then branched into bachelor's of manufacturing management, and which eventually is leading me to my current state. But being able to always be around that same process of taking a chunk of raw material and turning it into a usable product, that got to stay with me no matter what level of organization I'm in. And so that's kind of the push to how I got to where I am. But if we go back to the original question, that torch, that was definitely year 2, machine trades.
But you stuck it out through the boring stuff.
I did, because it was easily identifiable that was just kind of you have to understand the theory behind things before you can get into practice, because anybody that's been around machining understands that, yes, there is a theory of how things are supposed to work out, but that's not always the reality of things in the end. But you have to have a baseline to know what you're referencing to.
Sure. And you mentioned you got into it because of your brother. Is your brother still part of the industry as well?
He is. He is still a machinist. Oh, wow. That's got to be 25 plus years, I would think, at this point. I mean, he still loves it probably as much as I would say I do. It's a very interesting field, and it's not boring. That's for sure.
It's only gotten more exciting since the first year, right?
I would say there's been a very decent progression, yes.
And so you mentioned one of the benefits of going to work for a company like Toro was the tuition reimbursement and that ability to go back to school and learn even more, it sounds like, in the engineering vein in particular, to round out your skill set for, machining and engineering. What were some of the challenges or, maybe surprises of going to such a large company right off the bat? I've
had the opportunity to work in large and small operations. I'd say the biggest hang up in a large organization, right, there's good benefits to it. I just mentioned the one, tuition reimbursement, right? Not everybody's going to be able to offer that sort of benefit. But you become, definitely for someone like myself who strives to be the best and wants to kind of prove themselves and continue to grow and grow and grow. In a large organization, you tend to become a number. Large organizations can offer bigger, better benefit packages, but fulfillment in your job is much more attainable in a smaller organization. You're not lost in the shuffle. Your individual contribution really can shine through. And it could also have an adverse effect. I mean, your lack of performance really shines through as well, but
sure can.
We're not going to go there. Nobody lives in that world. So yeah, I guess just the kind of to give perspective from both ends, because yes, I talked about Toro being a great launching pad for my career. And not everyone, like I said, not everyone's going to have that same opportunity. But continued development, education, I mean, if you want to make a name for yourself and progress in a career, if you're looking to me for advice or a career path, how I got to where I am, you got to want it, and you really got to put your time and effort in. Yes, there may be a rare occasion that stuff just drops in people's laps, but that's not the reality for most. You really got to want it, know what you're going after, set goals, and go get it.
And Dan, I thought that was a really good contrast about what one can get in sort of the quote unquote safety or comfort of a large company versus maybe the thrill of a small company and the amount of impact that you can have. What did you ultimately conclude was more valuable to you? Was it the impact and the range of motion, or the comfort and the safety of the bigger companies?
That's a big curveball you just threw at me. For me personally, right, it's tough for me to sit here and say one way or the other, because I did get a big benefit early on from that large organization. But in the grand scheme of things, for someone like myself that is going to put in the extra effort, that wants to prove and wants to grow, the small organization has a better feel. you know full well that your extra efforts are right there recognized. You can see the impact of them. I could run 350% efficient in a Toro organization, but when it rolls up into a KPI, it doesn't reflect anything.
Tenth of a point. Yeah.
There's goods, there's bads, there's from both sides. So it's hard for me to pinpoint one, but in the grand scheme of things, yeah, impactfulness, career fulfillment, I would tend to lean toward the smaller organization where your efforts are more noticeable.
Sure. And I think what I appreciate in the way that you described it is sort of like anything, right? You talked about teenager, not sure what I want to do, get an opportunity at a good company with a good reputation, that clearly takes care of its people, and that creates more opportunities for you with being able to go to school, get reimbursed, broaden your skill set, which sort of then ultimately you conclude, hey, I like to have more impact. How do I have more impact? Like it doesn't have to be a hard either or. This is just some of how careers progress, right? And what you learn from your first experience, what you learn from your second, third, 10th experience, it just continues changing who you are and what you value. And at the end of the day, these aren't things you need answers to at age 22, right? This is just part of the evolution of a career and a person.
Yeah, and it's tough to project that to a young individual now. This is what happened to me and what worked for me. Could you follow a similar roadmap to success? Maybe, but it's never a perfect science. Things are going to change. You may not have the exact same opportunity throughout that I ran into, or maybe you'll have more. So yes, you can lay it out, show experiences, but it's a basic roadmap.
Sure. And I mean, to contrast slightly, I've only ever worked for software startup companies or the companies that acquired them. So, one time I was part of a company that got bought by Dell, and it was like, oh, there's a 401k match. Oh, there's how much time off? There's a bonus. What's a bonus? Right? Because I've had more affinity for the smaller company, big impact, and then you become part of a very large organization. And yes, there's plenty of pros and there's plenty of perks, and there's different opportunities to have impact, and depending on what ultimately drives you as a person and what's important to your family, and which sacrifices you choose to make on the scale of work and life and as an individual, there's fits for everybody. And I think what's most important, and certainly something I've talked about with other folks who wonder, what's it like to be at a small company? There's only one way to find out if you're going to like it, and that's to try it, right? And if that responsibility bogs you down and causes you to not be your best and have, as you said, negative impact, well, maybe it's not the best fit. But if you thrive on the latitude that additional responsibility bestows upon you and you enjoy it, man, there's nothing like it.
You made a good comment there that made me think of something. Priorities change. Typically, I would think in your earlier career days, you probably have the flexibility to take some more chances, not be so reliant on that safety net. You decide you want to start having a family, well, then your priorities change. Maybe this isn't all about me and my career now. It's about the stability, the benefits. You got to kind of balance that on how you're progressing throughout your career as well. I'm saying that, and what I referenced early was I had the safety net and then I went away from it. I'm kind of saying one thing, but I actually kind of did the opposite. But at the same time, I had developed myself to the point where I was betting on myself. So it's all about the person, but it is an interesting dynamic, and that definitely, I'm sure, plays a part in people's decisions day in and day out. Am I at the right point in life with family and stability in my job and the benefits that I'm looking for, or am I still in a super aggressive growth mode?
Very well said. And now, Dan, you're somewhere where you're having a pretty significant impact. So, talk to us about MedFab. When did you get to MedFab? How did you get to MedFab? And tell us about the company.
So I joined MedFab October of 23. So I'm year and a half-ish in. I came to MedFab. I mean, there was one extreme selling point as I sat down with the owner a couple different times. I think we hit it off extremely well. Very traditional businessman. Got into a manufacturing business where he needed some expertise and support on the operation side. But the major selling point was EOS. And I don't know if you even know what I'm referencing there, Entrepreneurial Operating System. And just the way that it structures everything, right? Because the same way we talk about Datanomix, and we all want a usable schedule, and our ERP scheduler doesn't work so well. I'd reference it the same way in like meeting structures and communication within EOS. It's so structured. How many times on the opposite end of that spectrum can you say, yeah, I sat in meetings all day and it really didn't amount to anything. There's no action plan. There's no to-dos. Nothing came out of it. Well, EOS really forces us into that funnel of addressing what the real issues are that are facing you right now. You as the group identify what your top issues are. You problem solve them, and you create to-dos to remedy those problems and make them not happen again. And then the next week you can look at the next ones. And so a very systematic way of addressing issues and putting measures in place to remedy them, instead of just going in week after week, meeting about the same thing. Yep, we still have this problem. Round table a little bit and walk out and everyone goes, what were we supposed to do? And it's all based on core values. This is really the big kicker. I mean, I'm a real big culture guy. I mean, you spend a lot of time at work. You want to have a culture of people that are working as a team, and they all kind of see that vision that the leadership team has put in place. They understand what their individual contributions mean as stepping stones to get to that vision, and everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. You hire, you fire, you promote and develop based around core values, and you put the right people in the right seats to accomplish what your vision and your goals are. It becomes a lot easier to obtain those goals. That whole EOS, right? If I was teetering on the fence whether to join MedFab or not, that pushed me right into it.
So they had already been practicing EOS for some time before you got there.
So yes, and short answer, yes, to a degree. The current MedFab owner has operated under EOS in other organizations that he has owned. So he was implementing it at MedFab, but kind of still in its infancy. And I'd say we're not 100% throughout the organization yet. We meet as a leadership team, core values, right? That the whole structure is throughout the organization. We talk about it basically on a daily basis to keep that ingrained in everybody. But as far as projects, scorecard measures, it has reached the shop floor, but basically on the scorecard side of things, not necessarily full action plans, to-dos, quarterly projects, which within the system are called rocks. That hasn't made its way all the way to the shop floor yet, but I have that planned out for Q3, Q4 implementation. And so it's a great way to run a business.
And had you done EOS previously, Dan, or how did you know that was important to you?
I had not ever even heard of EOS prior to discussing with MedFab owner during our interviewing process. But just the way that he presented it and kind of the talking points that I just kind of went through, I was all about that, because in previous employment, there was a lot of hitting walls in that same scenario of the culture wasn't right. People were not acting as a team. Core values was not the foundational piece. Meeting structures, obviously, as I was projecting that here in our conversation, that was real life. Walking out of meetings and, hey, were you supposed to do something? What did we agree on? Now we're just wasting time. It's about identify what's a problem, IDS it, but IDS it in a way that's productive, right? And really drive down to what the root cause is. again, most scenarios, you're going to address a symptom, not the actual problem. Probably within the next few weeks of solving your symptom, that same issue is going to pop back up. And so, right, there's an evolution of getting good at really diving down and getting it from your whole team's perspective, get everyone's input to see it from every angle and get down to what really the problem is. Once you get there, then you can really make a change.
So it sounds like you felt like, or you had frustration from previous experiences over, let's say, collaboration, speed of decision, intentionality of solutions, and you felt like EOS was a framework that would mitigate a lot of those things.
100%. And it has definitely proven out.
And even further, it sounds like you actually have the latitude to be driving the implementation and continued rollout.
Yeah. So now as I'm changing a little bit of the organizational structure, you're exactly correct. Branching those meetings out and, engineering, we call them an L10. That's our weekly meeting cadence. Engineering staff, ops staff, and then that drives down through my supervisor to individual departments have their own L10s, and I'll sit in there once in a while and understand how they're addressing their issues and maybe give a little tweak here or there. I think it's also great in real time. If I'm walking the shop floor and I see someone struggling with something, hey, did you bring that up at your L10? Well, no. Well, why not? I see you're struggling with that day in and day out. Get it in front of your group. Figure out what the best solution is and get that taken care of, because why sit there and struggle with it? So it's a way to get everybody in the organization and involved and really understanding. Again, it all kind of goes back to that vision. Yeah, us as a leadership team can sit and plan and come up with this grandiose vision of where we want to grow the business to and how we're going to get there. But if you don't have a clear connection throughout the whole organization, we're not all rowing the boat in the same direction. And so I think that's again what EOS gets to do, is kind of brings that communication loop all together. I guess one other point there is there's cascading throughout this system. So let's say the milling department is struggling, IDSing an issue that they feel they've exhausted all their resource and we just can't figure this out on our own. Well, they could bubble that up to the ops team or straight to the leadership team. And so when we get back in to meet, that'll be front and center on our list. Hey, I see that they need some decision made or some support in some fashion at whatever level of the organization it is. Same could go downstream. There's been plenty of times at an operational level, we discuss a structural change or something I want to see implemented. I can just cascade that down to each individual department. So it's not, hey, let's take some notes and remember to bring that into that next meeting. It's right there, right now. And then to-dos, right? You got to hold yourself accountable to a to-do that you have signed up for, right? Because we come up with the to-dos. You identify, hey, is this clear? You know what your deliverable is before you exit that meeting. You have a clear due date on it. So when you come back to meet and you go through your to-do list, you state, is it done or is it not done? It's easy to say it's done. It's not so easy to sit in front of all your peers and say, no, I didn't get it done. And so the accountability piece and just continue drive to continuously improve.
It sounds too, Dan, like you got pretty significant buy-in, obviously not just from the leadership team, but from, the frontline folks, the folks on the floor as well. How did that go and how did you achieve that level of buy-in?
You don't necessarily get the buy-in immediately. There's a little prove-out process, but it's about getting them to understand their contribution, how it leads to the bigger picture, a lot of prove-out, right? Because dictation of change is always hard for people. So there's usually got to be some trial and error and continuous messaging just to kind of turn the corner on that from reluctancy to, hey, this really works. I had a problem. I brought it to my team. We addressed it. It got corrected. Gosh, this is really nice. I've been struggling with this for a while and I never had an outlet that really made it happen. And so I think that like any change, I think it's really you got to establish the quick wins, because if it's always a long game before there's something to show for it, that doesn't help get your buy-in.
What you're describing is the cycle of change management, right? You introduce the change. There's naturally skepticism. What is this? Why are we doing this? What does this have to do with me? This is some mumbo jumbo jargon thing. I don't understand. And then once people see the unlocks are, it solves direct impediments, direct problems that people have experienced. And when that gets attributed to the system or, the style of leadership or the style of communication, right now you're building momentum.
There's always a little curve there, in a sense of everybody has a lot of problems that are maybe more just complaints. Flipping that switch on, is this a complaint or is this a legitimate issue? Right. So in this evolution, kind of training people in a certain way to understand what that is and really bring forward what the issues are. But then don't try to pass that monkey on to somebody else. It's, do you have a solution for it? Does your team have a solution for it? Can that group assign a to-do to remedy that within? Not a, hey, I got this problem, let's send it to the leadership team to figure out. That's not the point of the whole system. It's identify it, work it through as a team, figure out what you guys can do as that team to remedy your problem without having to pass it on to somebody else to figure out for you. Right? There's naturally going to be times where it's, we just can't get there. And by all means, cascade it.
So
Here's the deal. Too many shops are drowning in half-baked data. You either get those on-off systems that can't tell the difference between cutting and chilling, or those bloated platforms that bury you in charts and dashboards with no actual answers. And ERP? Yeah, great. If you want yesterday's news tomorrow. That's exactly why Datanomix Production Monitoring was born. Built by people who were just as frustrated as you are and finally decided to fix it. Datanomix taps straight into the heartbeat of your shop, your machines. Not your whiteboards, not your spreadsheets, not your operators having to click a dozen things every hour. We're talking automated part name tracking, real cycle times and part counts, setup and changeover logging automatically, unified downtime insights for everything, true alarm status, real robotic integration, tooling plus sensor data, and yes, actual OEE metrics that matter. No fluff, no babysitting, just truth, visibility, and results. Want to see why it's the #1 monitoring platform in the game? Slide over to Datanomix.io and see what real shop floor clarity feels like.
I think, Dan, that is without even asking the culture question, that was a fantastic deep dive of the culture at Med Fab. Obviously, a huge part of what drew you in there. Certainly very clear to me in my interactions with you and others at the company that it's a very intentional culture of continuous improvement. And so in addition to that EOS methodology for making sure that you have a systematic way of identifying problems, addressing problems, making changes, getting better, owning actions, how do you see technology playing a part in that kind of a culture and the type of growth and the type of company that you're trying to be?
Technology is always a huge component. Again, on the buy-in side of shop floor personnel, right? There's any kind of change, right? Any kind of new technologies, any kind of automation, all these things that we're trying to incorporate into the business come with upfront work, right? So it's getting everybody to understand what the upfront work is going to turn into in the future. I'll say it for myself, but I'm sure it holds true for all leadership personnel, is I'm not trying to make you have to work harder. I want to put technologies and tools in place to actually make your job easier so that we can do more. And so really that's what we're looking at is the automation side of things right now. we've had a little discussion about this earlier, but then the question becomes, oh, what? We're all going to get replaced? It's like, well, no. When you implement automation, it actually can create more work because there's more throughput, there's more inspections, there's more parts that have to get moved. There's more stuff to do because your throughput is at a higher rate. And so I think that's one misconception when introducing automation is everybody's first thought is, oh, we're all getting replaced. That's not the case at all. It's all about growing the company and automation, data-driven decisions. I mean, that's a huge play moving toward Datanomix as a support for us. It's like I got to understand what is really happening, be able to react to the issues in real time, be able to kind of have this forward look on the scheduling side of things to see proactively where we may have a bottleneck, or then Datanomix can really show you in a visual state instead of trying to spreadsheet everything out or funnel through 5 layers deep in an ERP system, per job to understand what's happening or what's coming. The technologies are there to help ease, every pinch point throughout the organization. I think that's what everybody has to understand. So that's right. In a nutshell, those are the kind of key components that I'm looking at currently. We have one robotic cell in operation now. I think it's been in for a little over 2 years now. I'm demoing out on Friday. Something that I think is really, really cool in spindle automation for machining centers. That's definitely the next wave for me, just to get that additional bit of throughput in an unattended fashion. And like I said, go back to Datanomix. I mean, that's a key piece for us, technology-wise, to help us report better, help us see what's happening in real time, job plan, all kinds of benefits with that sort of system. And then data is key. I don't like making a lot of rash decisions without some sort of data backing. And so that's a key driver in driving us towards that.
It seems too, like, Dan, that when you have a structure like EOS in place, that should actually shine a light on where you might be in need of better data to make those better decisions, right? By having that framework in place and by digging deep into, well, what's the problem? What's the root cause? How did we get here? What do we need to do differently? It feels like you'd actually be able to uncover some data deficiencies pretty quickly.
Definitely. We ran into a situation this morning in our leadership L10 stemming around quote win percentage, right? So we've got scorecard measures to help us track the business and try to make some directional change or decisions based on number projections. Well, as things just didn't look right and we had to take a little bit deeper dive into the inputs, it became glaringly obvious that we had a system flaw further upstream that was causing those data points to not be accurate. And so scorecards, KPIs, metrics, scorecards, whatever you want to reference them as, you need measurables in place with accurate data to support those KPIs in order to understand trends, make decisions, change gears, identify problem points. And so I think that's very key. Measurables, data points.
And so in that situation that you had today, what ultimately comes out the back end of that process?
What we found today was a flawed process on the front end of order entry, leading back to, again, probably more of a ERP flaw, not being able in our systems to create an order off of a quotation. And so it's a little bit of a manual. Get a purchase order. If there isn't a quotation number referenced on their purchase order, then it takes somebody going to find what quotation was driving that and mark it to a 1 situation. So based on the reporting that we're using to populate this scorecard measure, that's the only systematic process that report generates off of. And so if everybody's not following that same procedure, or if it's cumbersome and they just, hey, I'm just going to enter this order, we are not stating what our real win percentage is. It's much, much lower. We as leadership are sitting in our round table thinking, gosh, are we doing something wrong here? What's happening? Or win percentage down? Just going a whole bunch of different directions trying to figure out what's the next step that we may have to take. Well, it was all based on bad data. That's not the point where you want to be. Because again, you got bad data or you're not looking at data at all, you could make a decision that is not the appropriate one for that outcome you're looking for.
You mentioned you're looking at some in-machine automation as well. And what are you envisioning there?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. I came across this probably at the end of last year. I kind of brushed it off. It didn't seem feasible at the time, but it resurfaced here recently with another provider. Seems, if you're talking about automation, there's usually a pretty hefty price tag that accompanies that. Big robot arms, more floor space taken up by this type of equipment. So what really interests me is the introduction to that. Yes, that's all fine and dandy when you've got contract runs, super long production, something that you really have longevity of repetition on. I wanted something more introductory, and what kind of automation could I use at our current state of low volume, high mix? And I'm not saying you can't use the big elaborate robot arms for that, but I needed something at a lower budgetary price point that I could start proving some stuff out on. And so this came about. It's actually very, very ingenious and simplistic when you talk about it. I mean, you want to automate your fully automated CNC piece of equipment. So you already have a very precise automated machine. Why not utilize that as your unattended run mechanism? And so this has pneumatic, everything. So, I probably invest in a little bit of upgraded work holding to accompany the utilization of grippers within machine tools. So you got a couple of vices set up on your table. Well, then the other half of your table is a grid pattern where all your raw materials are placed on. And so just based on programming this all into your program code, you call up tool 1, that is an OD gripper, goes over, picks the workpiece up, goes and puts it into the vise, again, all by code, clamps your vise down, and then away you go. You're at your starting point where typically an operator would have just put that workpiece in. Now your program runs. Maybe there's a different geometry that's left over once that first operation is done. Well, maybe you have tool 2 is a different gripper setup. Well, then the program just calls that one up once that cycle is done, pull the workpiece out, put it in the completed bin. I guess there is a phase 2 to this where we can do flipping. And so you can accommodate one piece workflow. I'm not going to start at that point because I want to prove out concept. But then it's as good as the available space on your machine table. And that's the amount of unattended run you can get before an operator's got to come tend to it. And so the whole goal is just, we got to keep the spindles turning and keep the overall head count down. And it really is very economical, something that can fit within my annual manufacturing spend budget. So definitely not a capital equipment purchase justification. And so I'm pretty excited to see how this can play out.
Well, it'll bear out in the data very quickly, won't it?
For sure.
That's fantastic. So, Dan, definitely appreciate the deep dive on your background. And, we even got a little philosophical there on big companies versus small companies. And I think that was important because it helps paint the picture for folks that nothing's a straight line. There's almost no bad decision you can make that early in your career. Well, there is, but there are lots of good decisions, and big company, small company, this company, that company. There really are very few. I should say there's almost no fatal decisions, career decisions that you can make at that point in your life because there's just so much more to learn. And I think it was awesome to hear that contrast about your journey in particular and the benefits you got from going one way, but then sort of the freedom and impact dimension in going to smaller companies, diving into EOS. I'm actually hearing of a lot of shops doing EOS nowadays. So I'm certain that's going to be a topic that garners some interest, and just hearing the structure and the methodology behind that as a mechanism to deliver continuous improvement. Definitely, hugely valuable both for me and for the audience, because again, I'm hearing more and more of that from owners and leaders in manufacturing that folks are adopting this. So definitely more to look into there. And then of course, I know how much time you spend thinking about technology and automation, and how do you make more, and how do you make more for less, and how do you do more with less. So definitely great tip as well there on some of the automation stuff that you're looking at. So as you know, on Manufacturing Mavericks, we like to end with a little bit of a philosophical question here. So if you could go back in time and you could talk to that kid that was bored out of his mind in his first year of learning about machining, what advice would you give him based on everything you know now?
There's a glaring one that I would stipulate. It's, you don't have to figure it all out at that point in time, but pick a direction, set goals, and don't let anything stop you from reaching those goals. And it's completely okay if you change direction. That's completely natural. Things are going to change. People change. You may think you want something one day and it just doesn't work out to be the best for you. Go ahead and change direction. Set a new goal and go make that one happen. But don't let anything stand in your way, right? You're going to get knocked down. 100% you're going to get knocked down along that journey, but pick yourself back up. I had made a note here based on something you had said earlier about the benefits in a large company. It doesn't have to just be in a large company, because 401ks are out there everywhere, but invest in that 401k early. That's a big one.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of compounding, if I can summarize what I think you said, Dan, it's really at points in your career, there's this perception of the risk of switching or of doing something different. And it's almost never what you think it is, right? The risk is tiny, and the benefit is usually exponential by comparison, right? We get afraid of these, what's that going to mean about me? What's that going to say about me? Is that going to get me labeled, boxed in, binned, constrained in some way? And it's almost always the opposite, isn't it?
It is. There's been times, say a company was downsizing and you get laid off and you think that you had the perfect situation and gosh, now what am I going to do? I just lost everything I had worked for. But many times you find that next opportunity and you're like, oh my gosh, what was I missing? I thought I was so happy with what I was doing and it really wasn't. And so a lot of times the setbacks you think are detrimental at the time, but a lot of times they're going to lead to something better.
It's so true. What a great capstone piece of advice, Dan, and appreciate you being willing to share that and help set the perspective on that here on Manufacturing Mavericks. Our goal is to get the real stories of folks that have had a significant impact in the manufacturing sector and tell the stories that they're not always a straight line. There's many paths to victory. And often what matters most is being willing to stick with it and try to make the most of yourself along the way. So appreciate you sharing everything you have with us and all the advice and the insight to EOS, automation, data-driven decisions along the way. Fantastic having you, Dan, and thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me, Greg. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Take care, Dan. Thank you for listening to Manufacturing Mavericks. If you'd like to learn more, listen to past episodes, or nominate a future Maverick to be on our show, visit mfgmavericks.com. And don't forget to subscribe to and rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app.
Let's be honest. How much money are you really losing to scrap, broken tools, and wishful thinking? Yeah, probably more than your accountant's comfortable with. That's where TMAC AI comes in, powered by the brilliance of Karen Engineering and brought to you by the team at Datanomix. This isn't some maybe it'll help gadget. This is real-time, AI-driven feedback while the part is still being cut. That means you're not waiting until inspection to find out you've just made a $500 paperweight. Here's what TMAC AI does. It listens to your machine like a CNC whisperer. It flags bad parts before they become bad news. It fine-tunes your tool life based on actual cutting data, so you're not guessing, you're optimizing. Less scrap, longer tool life, smarter decisions. All without you lifting a finger or losing your cool. Want to see it in action? Head over to Datanomix.io because wasting money is so last season. Do you ever walk out to the shop floor, stop mid-stride, and think, are we even running right now? Yeah, we've all been there, playing the guessing game with production timelines like it's some CNC version of Clue. And let's be real, ERPs weren't built for the trenches, and most monitoring tools might as well be magic 8 balls. That's why Datanomix built their production monitoring platform for real manufacturers with real machines doing real work. It hooks straight into your CNCs, sheet metal, fab equipment, whatever you've got, and starts feeding you the facts in real time. Cycle times, downtime, job performance, all without needing your operator to hit a single extra button. It's like flipping on the lights in your shop for the first time and realizing just how much better things can run when you're not in the dark. Ready to find out what your team can actually do when you give them the right tools? Head over to Datanomix.io and get your eyes on the prize.